Welcome back to Divine Mercy Radio's second day of our spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. We've got a Care-a-thon goal of $125,000, and that helps us to keep the lights on and keep these radio waves going. And the way that you help us to do that is, one, you call into 785-621-4110, and two, you get to help use other people's money. That's always awesome. So we have people who have donated before the Care-a-thon, and they gave us what are called matching funds. That means if I was to donate right now, then whatever I donated, whether it was $5,000 or $20, it would automatically be doubled. And we are starting today with $15,740. So if we could use those up by the end of the day, that's what we're striving for. Let's get it going first thing this morning. Here in just a little bit, we'll get one of those questions going. We'll get the phones ringing, and we're going to get started on chipping away at those funds. 785-621-4110. We have a wonderful lineup once again today. Nathan does such a good job of getting people in here that are going to give us great interviews. We're going to start off with our foundress, Donetta Robben, here in just a minute, and she's going to be talking about heroines of the Old Testament. So this will be a really good talk. Then we've got Dr. Abe Fisher with the role of the church in maintaining hope, Father Nick Parker with the problem of evil, and then rounding out this morning will be Father Brian Lager, White Smoke and Sacred Votes. That's a good title. Understanding the Papal Conclave. So that's going to be an important one. It promises to be a wonderful day. I want to remind people that as we are in our Care-a-thon, we also have some gifts to give away for those who call in with their pledges. So if you give $250 or more during this pledge, you're going to get a beautiful set of 4 slate coasters with a Divine Mercy Radio logo. And I'll see if maybe I can get a set of those in here so I can hold them up so everybody that's watching online can see those. And we are on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble Live, so you can see us on there. But those $250 donors will get that set of slate coasters, and you'll be entered into a drawing for one of the following prizes: a Bose portable smart speaker donated by Dave and Janet Schmidt, who are the owners of Dave's Auto Repair here in Hayes; a St. Padre Pio laser engraved image donated by Josh Schrader and Chase Berg. So Chase Berg is one of the owners there. Josh Schrader, he works for Cabinets by Phoenix, and he is the one who engraved that. And then we have a handmade ladder rosary donated by Dora Liker of Munger, a 50-pound beef package. Oh my goodness, that's a really good one also, because the price of beef is astronomical right now. And that was donated by Matthew and Stella Ziegelmeyer from Colby. Then we have a St. Francis prayer framed wall hanging, and that's donated by John and Kathy Shupman, owners of Katz Hallmark here in Hayes. We also have a drawing for a $100 gift certificate to Hickok Steakhouse here in Hayes, and that's donated by Oscar Runyon, Greg Whitehair, and Damon Hoare, who are the owners. And they also feed us every day for lunch, and it's always amazing. I'm never disappointed. Please support them. I'm going to hold up here so those people out there can see. This is our slate coasters. And then I'm going to get to this mug here in a minute. But first, if you give $500 or more, you'll receive everything that I was talking about above, plus a 60-second spot celebrating a loved one's birthday, an anniversary, a baptism, wedding, or virtually anything else that you could think of. We can help make it happen. $1,000 donors, everything that I mentioned, plus a Divine Mercy travel mug, which I'm holding up right now. And as I said yesterday, I wish I would have had this, because I rode my motorcycle here yesterday. I tried to put my coffee in my saddlebag. That did not work out. I lost a lot of my coffee before I got up here, but this handy dandy one has a little nice snapping closed lid. And it would have held it in there for me. I wish I would have had it yesterday. But that goes to the $1,000 donors. And then you also receive 2 tickets to the annual banquet, which will be held on Saturday, September 13th in Hayes, and Sunday, September 14th in Salina. And the dynamic deacon guest speaker is Beacon of Truth, Deacon Harold Burke Sivers. All right. Now that we got through some of those important announcements, I want to get to a trivia question. If you don't know how this works, you call into the donation line, 785-621-4110. And if you get this trivia question right, we will put you in a drawing for a $50 gift certificate to Messenger Traditional Catholic Books and Gifts here in Hayes. And Jerome and Angela Schmeidler are the owners of that wonderful store. Please support them. They support us. So here is your question. Call in 785-621-4110. All right, here we go. Who helped the spies in Jericho? Is it A, Rahab, B, Mary, C, Judith, or D, Eve? Who helped the spies in Jericho? A, Rahab, B, Mary, C, Judith, D, Eve. Call 785-621-4110. That is also the line that you can call to donate. I know a lot of people are headed to work this morning, headed to school. You can help your kids call in. You can call in yourself. You can answer the question. You can donate. You can do both at that same number, 785-621-4110. All right. Now, without further ado, we have a very special person in here. So we have Donetta Robben in getting ready to talk about Heroines of the Old Testament. So I'm going to love this interview for a couple reasons. Donetta is the founder, or maybe foundress, however that would be, of Divine Mercy Radio, and is the retired director. She continues to serve on our board as our secretary of the board of directors. She's married to Lester, and they have 2 children and 6 grandchildren. So wonderful, beautiful story. Thank you for being here with us this morning.
You bet.
Okay. Anything else you want to tell us about your family or anything before we get started?
No.
Okay. All right. Sometimes I like to let people dote on their families.
I got a lot of material.
All right. Here we go.
I wanted the answer to that question. I thought about her for a heroine, but I did not do it. Well, too many.
She is in the ancestral line of Jesus, so maybe that helps people out. All right, here we go. So Donetta is going to talk to us about heroines of the Old Testament. So maybe start there, Donetta. What is a heroine?
Well, a heroine, the definition is a woman admired and emulated for her achievements and qualities. So that's kind of a simple.
Okay, that sums it up pretty quickly. Yeah. So then I take it we're going to walk through just some of these stories.
Right.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. The first one I have is Esther. Now, a lot of people know her story, but I have some details about her story that you might not know. So the timeline was like 485 to 464 BC, and the place was the Empire of Persia, which today is modern-day Iran. And the city was Susa, which was a royal city, and it was the center of art, architectural, and industry. So it was like the main hub, I guess. And the Jews had been displaced, and while some went back to Israel, some assimilated into the Persian culture while still practicing their Jewish faith. So that's kind of the setting for this. And Esther's parents died when she was very young, and her uncle, Mordecai, adopted her. He was very protective of her, and she listened to everything Mordecai said. So it was kind of a good relationship that they had. Mordecai's job was to serve in the king's court. So the king at the time was Ahasuerus. So the book of Esther starts out with her uncle Mordecai overhearing 2 of the king's eunuchs plotting to kill the king. And Mordecai informed the king of this. And so the 2 eunuchs were brought before the king. They were questioned, they confessed, and they were put to death. Then King Ahasuerus had these events recorded, and this little bit will be significant later on in the story. So that's why I told it. Okay. And so in the second year that King Ahasuerus was ruling, he threw this huge party and for all the people in his provinces. And it was days of feasting where liquor was flowing freely and gold cups and, wine was flowing. And the queen, she would have her own celebration in a separate place in the palace. It wasn't with the king. Then on the 7th day of this celebration, King Ahasuerus instructed the eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti into his presence because, like a man, he wanted to show off her beauty. So, but she didn't want to go. So now the custom was that the only time a queen could go to the king was if the king requested her presence. So she was invited. She didn't go to the king, and she was very he was very upset. He was actually enraged. So he consulted his wise men, versed in the law, what we would call lawyers today, as to what should he do because the queen disobeyed his orders. And the lawyers said, if you don't do anything, then all the women of the provinces won't obey their husbands. So this was a really big deal back then. So the lawyers suggested that King Ahasuerus banned Queen Vashti from ever entering his presence again. And they suggested the king give the crown to someone more deserving. So a decree went out to all the provinces of where King Ahasuerus was ruling that, first of all, a man should be lord of his household. And then second of all, the king's eunuchs was in charge of going through the provinces and bringing together beautiful virgins. Among these beautiful virgins then was Esther, the niece of Mordecai. And Mordecai instructed Esther to not let anyone know she was a Jew. As a matter of fact, I think her name was a little different, and they kind of changed her name to Esther when she was going to be going to the king. For a year, the eunuchs instructed these women. They brought oils, ointments, how to present themselves in the royal court, and all of this, and beautiful clothes. And after a year, one by one, in the evening, the woman would go to the king and then return in the morning. But none of them found favor with the king except Esther. So Esther he placed the royal crown upon her, and she became now Queen Esther. But he didn't know she was a Jew. Nobody really knew. So in the court of King Ahasuerus was a man named Haman. Now, next to the king, he was the most powerful man, and the king trusted him with everything. And Haman was not happy with Mordecai because he expected everybody to come by him and bow to the ground. Now, when they bowed, they physically bowed to the ground. And Haman said he could not do that because he was a Jew and he only could worship God. And this angered Haman a great deal. So he went to the king and he said, there's a group of people in your provinces that don't want to obey your laws. And the king says, well, do with them. He trusted Haman. So he said, do with them what you will. And he took off his signet ring and gave it to Haman. So Haman went and he had a decree sent out to all the provinces in their own languages that on the 13th day of the 12th month, all the Jews should be killed in one day and their goods seized as spoil. So Mordecai got wind of this, and he alerted his niece, Queen Esther, through her maids. Queen Esther was afraid to approach the king as, one, she hadn't been summoned, and two, Haman was so favored with King Ahasuerus that she was afraid the king would not believe her. And her uncle sent word to Esther that says, this is a famous quote from the Bible, who knows but that it was a time like this that you obtained your royal dignity. Did you need to interrupt?
Well, yeah, I can really quickly.
Okay.
So just want to congratulate Ann Huguenin, who is the trivia winner, supporter, a great person here in Hayes. So congratulations to Ann. Thank you so very much for calling in and getting that trivia question right. We will get you entered into that drawing for that gift certificate to Messenger Traditional Catholic Books and Gifts. You are listening to Divine Mercy Radio Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. We are talking with Donetta Robben about heroines of the Old Testament. And if you would like to help us by partnering with us during this Care-a-thon, please call into 785-621-4110 to make your pledge. We do have those matching funds. And so we started with a little over $15,000 in matching funds today. We want to get those used up. Let's get those phones ringing. Let's start getting those pledges coming in. 785-621-4110. All right, let's get back to speaking with Donetta Robben, talking about Esther. And thank you for that background on Esther, because sometimes if you read through the story, you can kind of miss stuff. And then you kind of, well, why wouldn't Esther just go to, I mean, isn't the king her husband? But yeah, as you point out, this is not how it was back then. And so, especially with what happened to the first wife,
Yeah.
that might make her very nervous to be like, if I have any misstep, this could be really bad for me. So
Right.
yeah, if you would continue with your story.
So Queen Esther, through her maid, sent word to her uncle Mordecai to go and assemble all the Jews in Susa, fast on her behalf, all of them, not eating or drinking for 3 days. And then she and her maids would do the exact same thing. And then, thus prepared, she would go to the king contrary to the law. And she just said, if I perish, I perish. So after 3 days, she had put ashes on her head and the whole thing that the Jewish people do. She cleaned herself really well, bathed, anointed herself, dressed in royal attire, and she took 2 of her maids with her. One was to lean on, and the other, because she was very nervous, and the other one to carry the train of her dress. So she went through all the portals of the castle, and the king she got to the king, and he was on his throne. And the king looked up, and his face was filled with anger. And Esther staggered, and her face changed colors, and she leaned on her maid, and then God somehow changed the king's anger and he approached Esther, and he took her in his arms. And guess what Esther did? She fainted. So she didn't get her mission accomplished. So the next day, Esther was walking through the courtyard, and the king saw her and extended his golden staff, which was a sign that she could approach him. And so she approached him, and she invited him and his Haman to a banquet that evening. So they attended, they drank, they ate, but Esther did not ask what she needed to ask. Instead, she just said, "Can you come to a banquet again tomorrow night?" And
playing the slow game.
That's right. You know, it would be hard. That night, the king, for some reason, could not sleep. I always think this is how the Holy Spirit works. And he asked his attendants to bring the chronicles of notable events. And he read them, and he realized that the person who alerted him that those 2 eunuchs were about to kill him never got rewarded. And so the next morning, he asked Haman, his notable assistant, what should be done to the man the king wants to reward? And of course, Haman thought it was himself. And so he said, for the man whom the king wishes to reward, there should be brought the royal robe which the king wore, and the horse on which the king rode when the royal crown was placed on his head. And then the man should ride the horse into the public square of the city and cry out before him, "This is what is done for the man whom the king wishes to reward." Then the king said, "Hurry, do this for the Jew Mordecai." Haman was, he was very humbled, really. He was actually furious because he had built a gibbet 50 cubits high that he planned on hanging Mordecai on when it was time for the Jews to be killed all in one day. And that night, the king then and Haman went to the queen for another banquet. Again, they drank and ate merrily. And then the king asked Esther, "What is it that's troubling you?" "You can ask for anything," he said, "even up to half of my kingdom." Then the queen begged for her life and the life of her people, as they were to be delivered to destruction. And the king asked, "Who is this man that would do this?" And Esther replied, "Haman." He was doomed. So the king was furious, and he ordered Haman to be hung on the gibbet that he had built for Mordecai. So since the decree went out with the king's signet ring, King Ahasuerus couldn't really change it. So he instructed all the Jews to defend themselves in any way they could. And the Jews did that, and they were saved, and the event was celebrated throughout Jewish history. So it's kind of a cool thing. So yeah. I chose Esther as a heroine because she put her own life in danger to save her people.
Yeah. That is
So
absolutely
that they had.
that's a wonderful story, and also just some very good background, and even something that you mentioned in the Persian culture. There, once they had put down a law, it was their other law that said if a king makes something such, it cannot be taken back even
Right.
by the king. So yeah, sometimes people are wondering, well, why can't they just know? Because that's how their laws were. And so yeah,
Even
what
the
a
king couldn't break it.
yeah. So, what a beautiful story there. Awesome story about Esther. I love that one. I want to remind people that we are listening to our Divine Mercy Radio Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. And so we are praying and trusting and not worrying that God is going to take care of us in these radio stations, because that's what He has always done. And He has done it so beautifully through the gifts that you guys give us. And we have just wonderful, wonderful donors. We have wonderful underwriters. And if you would like to be one of them, call in today to 785-621-4110. We still have a lot of those matching funds left over, and we want to get those used up. Let's get our first call, our first donation this morning during this wonderful talk with Donetta Robben about heroines of the Old Testament. And so if you would please give us a call, 785-621-4110, and let's get this ball rolling. All right, back to Donetta. I think we're going to move on then to Judith. Is that correct?
Judith, yep.
Fantastic.
So the setting of Judith is the sixth century. It's 500 BC, and the book in the Bible, the book of Judith, is right before the book of Esther. So Nebuchadnezzar sent out messengers to gather warriors throughout his kingdom, because he had a vast kingdom, but he wanted even more land. Sound familiar in our day even? He wanted more territory. So the messengers came back, though, empty-handed, because no one really wanted to fight a war in the king's war. So Nebuchadnezzar ordered his chief general. He was mad, of course. He ordered his chief general, Holofernes, to wage war on all of his western territories for disobeying his orders. Nebuchadnezzar then ordered Holofernes to kill all the men, burn their fields, plunder all they had, as well as destroying any religious statues and temples. All would know that Nebuchadnezzar was their god. So Holofernes, with a huge, large army and plenty of supplies, did just that, and the word spread. Some communities came out to meet Holofernes and surrender, and thus they saved their lives. Now, at this time, the people of Israel were living in Judea, and they wanted to protect their temple, their altar, and their sacred vessels. And Joachim was the high priest at the time, and he met with the leaders of the Israel community, and they decided to close up all the passes that got to their Judea, and that would prevent Nebuchadnezzar's army from entering. And then the people of Israel fasted, put ashes on their heads, sackcloth, and prayed night and day. I'm really glad we don't have to do the sackcloth thing. But and then Holofernes was addressing the people of Judea, and he was watching him, and he said, "Who are these people?" And Achan, one of Holofernes' leaders, he was the leader of the Assyrians, he told him about Israel's history. In short, if they obeyed their God, they were undefeatable. And if they didn't obey their God, they could be defeated. So the other men in Holofernes' army said, "Look at them. They're a small army. They're weak, and we have many of us. There's no way they can defeat us." So they bound Achan and threw him at the base of the hill where the Israelites were. Their plan was to kill him when they were going to kill the Israelites. So that's just how it was when you spoke to someone in authority. If you didn't say what they liked, they kind of threw you out.
Off with your head.
Yeah. The Israelites found Achan and fed him, and he stayed at the house of Uzziah. The next day, Holofernes and his many soldiers, they moved closer to the Israelites, planning to wage war. When the Israelites saw their vast numbers, they were terrified. So, observing the Israelites, Holofernes and his men determined the strength of the Israelite army is not their spears, but the might of their mountains. That's where they were getting their water supply. So Holofernes decided to cut off the water supply, and the Israelites would die of famine and thirst. So Holofernes' men surrounded the Israelites so no one could escape. And then for 34 days, they cut off the water supply, and the Israelites knew they were doomed. Their wells dried up. The women and children were fainting of thirst. Then the Israelites begged Uzziah to surrender to Holofernes. They determined that if they may be slaves of Nebuchadnezzar's people, but at least they would still have their lives. And so Uzziah told them, let's just wait 5 more days. Let's give the Lord 5 more days. If he doesn't do anything in 5 days, then yeah, we'll surrender. So then came Judith. Judith was a widow for 3 years and 4 months. Her husband died during the barley harvest of what we would call today a heat stroke. Even though Judith had many servants as well as gold and silver, she lived really simply. She lived in a tent on top of her house, and she wore widow garb and fasted each day except on the day before and the day of Sabbath. And she had great devotion to God, and no one ever spoke ill of her. But when Judith heard that Uzziah was going to turn the city over to Holofernes' army, she chastised the leaders of the Israelites, saying they were testing God and putting restrictions on him by giving him a deadline, which we have a tendency to do that sometimes too. Then Judith convinced the elders that after dark, they were to open the gate of the city for her and her maid, and they were not to ask her what she was about to do. And for some reason, they agreed to this. So then Judith went back home. She prayed. She put ashes on her head. And during her prayer, she cried out to God. Then Judith went into her house. She bathed, anointed herself with oil, combed her hair, put on a tiara, arrayed herself in festive clothes such as she wore when her husband was alive. And she put on bracelets, earrings, anklets, and rings. She wrapped up wine, a flask of oil, a bag of parched grain, and a cake of dried fruit and fine bread, and gave them to her maid to carry. Then she went to the city gates, and Uzziah and the leaders of the city opened them for her. They admired how beautiful she was because they hadn't seen her like that for quite a while. They watched as Judith and her maid went down the mountain, passed through the valley until they could no longer be seen. So Judith and her maid ran into the Assyrian patrol, who asked her, where did she come from? Where was she going? So Judith said she was fleeing from the Israelites who were about to be handed over to their army. She asked to see the commander of the army, and she would tell him how he could capture the Israelites without losing a single soldier. So they took her to Holofernes, and there was excitement in the camp because of how beautiful she was. You know, these men have been at war, so here's this beautiful woman. So when they brought Judith before the presence of Holofernes, she prostrated herself until his slaves raised her up. But Holofernes told her to take courage. She was safe. He would never have come against the Israelites, but they defied his lord, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of all the earth. Judith told him that everything Archer had said was true. As long as the Israelites obeyed God, they could not be defeated. But Judith continued, they are planning to sin. As they are about to kill animals they should not eat, and about to eat the first fruits which are reserved for the priests of the temple. She told Holofernes that she worships God and that she would go out to the valley each night and pray, and then God would let her know when they were about to slaughter the animals, and then she would tell Holofernes and he could, go in and capture the Israelites. He thought this sounded like a great plan, and he thought she was beautiful and smart. So when after 3 days of this, on the 4th day, Holofernes decided he was getting very lustful towards Judith. He decided on the 4th day to invite Judith and her maidservant to a banquet, and Judith went. And Holofernes, like I said, was becoming very lustful toward Judith, and he drank more wine than he had ever drank in his life. So when evening came, all of Holofernes' servants left the tent, and he was left alone with Judith. And Judith told her maid, wait outside the bedchamber. So Judith waited outside, and Holofernes just passed out from drinking too much wine. So while he was like sleeping or passed out, Judith went up to the post at the end of the bed, which is where his sword was, and she took it down, and she prayed to God. And in 2 strikes, she had pulled his hair back, and in 2 strikes, she cut off his head. And then she pulled the canopy of his bed down. Then Judith took her head, went out of the tent, gave it to her maid, who put it in her food bag, and they went out to pray, as they did every night. So nobody thought anything of
No,
it.
everybody's like, oh, yeah, this is what she does.
That's right. So Judith and her maid, they walked back to their city, and the watchmen opened the gates, and they were just shocked to see her because they didn't think they'd ever see Judith again. And she said to build a fire because she wanted to show him the head she had cut off. So this is what she said to God. Praise God. Oh, praise him. Praise him who has not withdrawn his mercy from the house of Israel, but has destroyed our enemies by my hand this very night. Then Judith pulled out Holofernes' head from the bag along with the canopy from his bed, and she said, the Lord has struck him down by the hand of a woman. As the Lord lives, who has protected me in the way I went, it was my face that tricked him into his destruction, and yet he committed no act of sin with me. So she was pretty proud of herself.
Yeah.
Then Judith asked the elders to bring Archer to them to confirm that this was the head of Holofernes. And Archer was astounded and believed in the God of Israel, and he was circumcised and joined the Israel people.
Wow, that is a great place to take a quick break
Okay.
here. Great story for us. We are talking with Donetta Robben about heroines of the Old Testament. You are listening to Divine Mercy Radio's Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. And we're getting ready to get to everybody's favorite part of the hour, which is our second question. So I know everybody loves these questions, loves calling in. If you want to try and get this question right, just take a stab at it. It never hurts. The worst thing that can happen is you get it wrong. That's okay. One of these questions will, or the right answer to one of these questions will get you put into a drawing for a $50 gift certificate to Messenger Traditional Catholic Books and Gifts. And we draw one of those every day. So if you don't win one day, you can call again the next day. So here we go with our second question of the 7 a.m. hour. Which of these women was married to a king? Was it A, Eve, B, Judith, C, Hannah, or D, Esther? If you've been listening, you could probably get a pretty big clue. Which of these women was married to a king? Was it Eve, Judith, Hannah, or Esther? Call 785-621-4110. We're also looking for our first donor this morning to help us get the ball rolling and start using up those matching funds. I know that once we get that first caller in, then everything is going to go smoothly from there. So let's get those callers in. Let's get the phones ringing. 785-621-4110. Call in. Let us know how we're doing. You can even also call in and you can be on the air with us, or you can call in and just ask a question and they can get it through the computer to me. If you want to ask Donetta a question, if you want one sent into the studio here, and that number would be 785-621-5061. That's 785-621-5061. If you want to ask Donetta a question, if you want to just get a basic question into the studio, and call that number, they'll get it to us. Call 785-621-4110 for your pledges. And let's get back with Donetta Robben. She's been talking to us about these wonderful women of the Old Testament who said, I don't care about my own skin. I care about saving the Israelite people. And so got a great story with Esther and Judith. Did you have anything to follow up with?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the scene is that all the Israelites are sitting there, the fire's going. Judith pulls out the head of Holofernes, and the person that was captured from, or they had it from Holofernes' army, verified this was Holofernes' head. So Uzziah said to Judith, "O daughter, you are blessed by the Most High God." Okay, I'll start this over. "O daughter, you are blessed by the Most High God above all women on earth." So does that sound kind of familiar?
Sounds a little familiar.
Then Judith returned to her home, and many people sought to marry her, but she remained a widow her whole life, and she was praised all the days of her life. And before she died, she distributed her property among her husband's relatives and some among her own relatives, and she freed her maid, and she lived to be 105 years old. Now, the book of Judith is not in the Protestant Bibles. And the first time I read this story, I was like, this is so cool. You know?
Yeah.
And, but according to Scott Hahn, there's some historical and geographical inconsistencies, and that might be why they didn't put it in. But that doesn't mean a character like Judith didn't exist. It's just that the author took some liberty in telling his story. And the Catholic Church sees Judith as an image of Mary, the Mother of God, as well as a type of the church, which cuts off the head of the devil.
Wow.
So, like Esther, Judith is a heroine because she put her life in danger in order to save her people.
Yeah, that is an awesome story. You are listening to Donetta Robben talk about heroines of the Old Testament here on Divine Mercy Radio Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. And that sounds a lot like what Judith just went through. Pray, hope, and don't worry. And so we are asking that you would partner with us during our Care-a-thon. We do this twice a year because this is how we pay. We have 2 employees, and that's it. And they do a wonderful job of running this place. We have 5 different stations. We've got satellite dishes, computer equipment, keep the lights on. And we are so blessed by all of you who donate and help us to do that. I also want to remind people that we get stories all the time. Father Fred, who is our spiritual director, talks about this a lot, about how people accidentally come to the radio station. They're just driving along, accidentally land on it. A while later, they happen to be Catholic. And so these radio waves do the evangelizing for you. I know it might not seem like it because I talk a lot, but I do have a problem evangelizing others on my own. And so if you're like me, you can give to the station and we will help to do that for you. We will put out the content that people need so that they can hear the truth instead of all the other junk that's out there today. So I ask that you would partner with us and call 785-621-4110 with your pledge today. I also want to congratulate Donna Bailey. So Donna was our trivia winner. She gets her name put into that drawing for a $50 gift certificate to Messenger Traditional Catholic Books and Gifts. The question was, which of these women was married to a king? And it is Esther. We actually just had that story a little bit ago this morning. So thank you, Donetta, for that. And congratulations to Donna for winning that trivia question. Remember, call 785-621-4110. If you're any of my family members listening, call in, donate. If you're one of my friends, call in, donate. If you don't know me at all, same thing. 785-621-4110. All right. Back to speaking with Donetta Robben, because I love these stories. They're beautiful. They're wonderful. And I think sometimes people forget, a lot of times the Old Testament, it was very patriarchal. But there are these strong women who did amazing things, saved the Israelite people in these very difficult times. And so I want to get back to them then, because this next one is one of my favorite stories of Naomi and Ruth.
Yeah, Naomi and Ruth. The author of the book of Ruth is unknown, and some say it was the prophet Samuel, others the prophet Nathan, who was a member of David's royal court. According to Scott Hahn, arguments can be made for both, so they really don't know who wrote the book of Ruth. But it is the only book of the Old Testament that's named after a Gentile. So that's kind of a little fun fact. So here's the scene. There was a famine in the land of Bethlehem in Judah, and Naomi and her husband Elimelech, did I say that right? And their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they migrated to Moab, which is modern-day Jordan, because of the famine, and they needed food. While there, the sons married 2 Moabite women. Mahlon married Ruth, and Chilion married Orpah. So Elimelech died. And then 10 years later, both of Naomi's sons died. So Naomi is left there with her two daughters-in-laws and no way to support themselves, really. So she had heard that the land she had come from was doing better and they did have food. So she decided to migrate back to Bethlehem. And she went with her daughter-in-laws and they started the journey. And then Naomi had a second thought. She realized that she could never, ever produce more heirs for her daughter-in-laws to marry. So there was really no purpose for her daughter-in-laws to go back to her native land. And she told them to go back to their mother's homes in Moab. Now, both Ruth and Orpah cried and hugged Naomi, and because the women were very close. They all shared the loss of their husbands. Orpah began the journey back to her mother's home in Moab. Ruth, however, cried, begged, and clung to Naomi. And that's when Ruth blurts out the well-known Bible verse that said, "Entreat me not to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." So in saying this, according to the Israelite law, Ruth pledges a lifelong loyalty to Naomi and solemnizes the commitment with this oath. And in doing so, she not only becomes the legal equivalent of Naomi's kinswoman, but destined to be buried in the same family tomb, but she unites herself to the people of Israel. She forsakes her native religion and transferred her religion or her allegiance to the God of Israel. So Naomi realized she couldn't talk Ruth into going home, so that was it. So Naomi and Ruth traveled from Moab to Bethlehem in Judah. From what I found out, this was like about a 30-mile journey, and it was all on foot.
Well, and really quickly, so people will understand this, if Ruth hadn't gone with Naomi, Naomi's lot in life was pretty much to starve and die.
Right.
Because in that time, the reason why, Donetta, why you mentioned that their husbands died, and she's like, well, I can't produce an heir. Well, because of what we talked about, because of it being a patriarchal society, women weren't really allowed to have jobs. Mm-hmm. And so if there wasn't a male there to provide for them, their lot in life was pretty much done. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there's just the selfless nature of Ruth, where she's like, no, I know what's going to happen to you. And although this means this is going to happen to me too, I'm going to go the mile with you. You know?
She didn't want to leave Naomi to herself. So they did arrive in Bethlehem, and it was the beginning of the barley harvest, which from what I read would have been like late spring. And the harvest was bountiful, indicating that the famine in that land was over. So Ruth asked Naomi to go into the fields and glean. Now, to glean means to gather up the ears of barley dropped or left behind after the reapers had harvested the fields. And the Torah required landowners to leave a small portion of their crop unharvested as a charity offering for the poor. And since Naomi and Ruth were both widows and they had no choice but to scrounge for food, this is what Ruth did, and Naomi allowed it. So as Ruth gleaned, she happened to come to the part of the field that belonged to Boaz. And Boaz happened to be part of the family of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. Now Boaz inquired of his servants, who was this woman that was in the fields? And they told her, well, that's the Moabite woman who came back with Naomi. And Boaz called Ruth to himself, and he said, don't glean in any other field but mine. And he told his servants, no one was to touch Ruth. Do not molest her. Leave her alone. So the barley harvest lasted about 2 months. And during this time, Boaz watched out for Ruth and made sure she had enough grain. He gave her more than she could possibly glean in one day to take to Naomi. So he was very generous with her. Then Boaz invited Ruth to eat with him. And Ruth told this to Naomi. So Naomi knew Boaz probably had some favor with Ruth. So the harvest ended, and Naomi, wishing to seek a home for Ruth, she was selfless too. She wanted Ruth to have a life. And she told her to bathe, anoint herself with perfumed oils, and she put on a nice dress. And after dark, she was to go to Boaz, who would be at the threshing floor. Now, the threshing floor was a cleared platform where grains were separated from their stalks and husks by a process of beating. And farmers such as Boaz would spend the night at the threshing site in order to guard the harvest from thieves. So once Boaz was finished eating and drinking and lay down close to the threshing floor, Ruth told her to pick up the blanket by his feet and lay there. And she didn't understand why, because she didn't know the Israelites' way, but she trusted Naomi, so she did this. And at midnight, Boaz woke up and realized someone was laying at his feet, and he said angrily, "Who's there?" And Ruth answered, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Spread your garment over your maidservant, for you are next of kin." Now Boaz answered, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor." This indicates that Boaz probably wasn't real young. And by saying "my daughter," he kind of had this father protection of her, So now Ruth had a piece of land that belonged to her husband. And widows, when they were poor, they could sell that piece of land to a close relative. And that relative was not Boaz, but someone else. And when Boaz asked the closer relative if he wanted to buy that piece of land, he said, "Of course I do," And then he says, "Well, your duty then is to produce an heir to Elimelech. And since Naomi was no longer of childbearing age, he must marry the next of kin, which was Ruth." And that relative did not want to do that. So he gave his right away to the land away to Boaz. And this left Boaz to marry Ruth. So they were married. They had a son, Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David, which Jesus has a direct lineage. So that's kind of cool. Naomi is a heroine, in my opinion, because she cared so much for her daughter-in-laws that she encouraged them to go back to their own people. And her love for them was so genuine. When Ruth refused, Naomi wished only the best for Ruth and guided her in the ways of the Israelite customs. Ruth, I think, is a heroine because she gave up her native country, her family religion, and was willing to do the hard work, all to protect and accompany Naomi in her life as an older widow, which wouldn't have been fun.
No, and even when she approaches Boaz, that was a very dangerous thing to do.
It was. And she had no clue that was the Israelite way. She just trusted Naomi. If that's what Naomi tells me to do, I'll do it.
Pray, hope, and don't worry.
That's right.
You are listening to Divine Mercy Radio Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. And we are talking with Donetta Robben about heroines of the Old Testament. We still need our first donor this morning. Call 785-621-4110. We appreciate everybody who is out there that donates, our wonderful underwriters, everybody who's praying for us. And that is another thing. If you're not able to donate, please donate your prayers. We need them. When Donetta started this radio station, it was very much on the pray, hope, and don't worry. And just trust, hey, if this is what God wants, then he's going to take care of us. And he always has. So thank you for being those people that help to take care of us through the grace of God. Call 785-621-4110. And let's get the phones ringing. All right, Donetta, we've got about 10 minutes here. So do we want to get into the story of Susanna?
Susanna's my shortest story.
Okay, fantastic. Then let's get to Susanna.
Okay, Susanna has a cool story too. Susanna's story is in the book of Daniel, and Daniel must have been a young man when the story happened. And Susanna was exceptionally beautiful and was raised in the Jewish traditions which she followed. And she married a rich man of status, and his name was Joachim. There were two elders who always lusted after Susanna. So Susanna would often take an afternoon walk in the garden next to her husband's home. And it was not unusual for these two elders to, after leaving Jochim's home at lunch or noon, lunchtime, I would say, and they would sneak back to get glimpses of Susanna. Well, one day these two men ran into each other and they said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And they both realized that they lusted after Susanna. So they decided to go to the gardens and watch her together. And it was a beautiful day. And as Susanna walked in the gardens, she decided to bathe. She asked her two maids who walked with her to shut the garden doors and bring her oil and ointments so she could bathe. Now, these two elders were hidden in the garden, which Susanna didn't know. And when her maids left, they plotted to take Susanna. So they approached her and told her, "You have to have relations with both of us. And if you don't, then we're going to tell the people that a young man was with you and you sent your maids away so you could have relations with this young man. And you even shut the garden door so this could happen." And Susanna realized she was in a tough spot because if she had relations with these elder men, she would sin against God. And if she didn't have relations with the elders, they would testify against her because it took two people to testify against you in order to put you to death by stoning for adultery. And she decided she would rather go into the hands of these elders than to sin against God. So then she just screamed. And then one of the elders quickly ran and opened the gate. So as the people of the household came out, the elder said they caught Susanna with a young man and he ran out that gate. And the next day, the Jewish leaders gathered. They were going to hear the charges against Susanna. And in order to be put to death for a crime, like I said, the Jewish community had to have two witnesses. So Susanna went to the trial with her relatives and her whole household, and she had covered her face with a veil. And the two elders said she had to take her veil off because they wanted to gaze at her one last time.
Creepos.
I know. Then they testified against Susanna that the young man was too strong for them and ran out the garden gate, and Susanna refused to tell them the name of this young man. And Susanna just looked up to heaven and cried loudly, "Eternal God, you discern what is secret. You are aware of all things before they came to be. You know that these men have borne false witness against me, and now I am to die." And as they began to lead Susanna off to be stoned to death, a young Jewish man, Daniel, cried out in a loud voice, "I am innocent of the blood of this woman." And the people said, "What is this you say?" And then Daniel kind of chastised them for not giving a proper examination and learning all the facts. And Daniel told the people, "Separate these two elders." And he brought one in and he said, "What tree in the garden did he see Susanna and this young man?" And the elder replied, "Under a mastic tree." And then he brought in the other one and he said, "Where did you see Susanna in this?" And he said, "Under an evergreen tree." So he caught the two men in a lie. Thus, Susanna wasn't put to death that day, but those two men who bore false witness against Susanna were put to death that day. And Susanna is a heroine, in my opinion, because she preferred to be put to death rather than offend God with sexual sin. So
yeah, and she knew, according to the law, she knew what was going to happen too. It's not like, oh, well, especially, since you said both of the witnesses were there. She knew, I have no one to testify for me.
Right.
My lot is going to be death. And my goodness. All right. We are listening to Donetta Robben speak to us about heroines of the Old Testament. I wanted to break in really quickly because I've got a couple of people to thank. We have now started in on our day. Todd and Lisa Gable pledged $250 and Dr. Abe and Janet Fisher donated $250. So together that's $500. And with our matching funds, that becomes a $1,000 donation. Look how quickly that can happen, folks. That is awesome. If you want to partner with Todd and Lisa and Abe and Janet Fisher, please give us a call, 785-621-4110. And give us your pledge to help us keep the lights on and keep these messages going out on these radio waves. We're going to get back to Donetta Robben and just do a little bit of wrap up here on these heroines of the Old Testament. So, Donetta, what is it that made you kind of want to speak to this topic in the first place, if I could?
Because I'm female. And I guess the female characters of the Bible really speak to me.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's more Heroines. I would say, what was our first question?
You're back here on this one.
The one who saved the Israelites.
Who helped the spies in Jericho.
Yeah,
yep.
yeah. She would have been one too. I thought I just can't do them all.
No, that's understandable. And you're right.
Another thing I want to say about just raising money for the station is if you have a business or a service and you want to get the word out about your business or service, this is a great place to underwrite. A lot of people will advertise on secular radio stations and it costs a lot of money. But to underwrite on Divine Mercy Radio, it's very inexpensive and your name gets out to lots of people. And the thing about it is a lot of people, if they need a new roof or they need, hail damage on their car or whatever, they'll call us and say, do you have an underwriter that does this? And then because they want to support the people that support us. And we had one car place. He did dent repair and all that kind of stuff, body work on cars. And he said that a year after he started underwriting here, he had his business paid off.
That's awesome.
So consider underwriting if you have a business or a service, because that's a great way to help us. And it helps us with our monthly income, because every month we're losing like thousands of dollars. And so it takes these Care-a-thons to keep us in the black for the year.
Yep.
And, if you want to underwrite, that kind of helps us too on our monthly basis. So just consider that.
Oh, absolutely. And, the difference between an advertiser and an underwriter is underwriters get to partner with us in this mission. And that's the beauty of this station. I love it because, all the secular stations, they play music and they have ads, updates, stuff that's going on, and none of it's necessarily bad. But it's all for entertainment purposes and stuff like that. And ours is about speaking the truth out there to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, our underwriters get to partner with us in putting the truth of Christ out there. And I just love it. So,
and another thing is, I don't know if you're like me, but I try to evangelize people, especially my relatives, which doesn't really work well. But,
not usually with family. No.
But you want everyone to go to heaven. You want to get yourself to heaven and take as many people with you as possible. And it's not always easy to share the message verbally, but if you just tell them, tune in, give them, we have tune in cards that you can just hand them a tune in card. Just tune in for 1 hour, just see what you think, and that's a great way to evangelize without, people hating you too much.
Absolutely. Well, Donetta, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cody.
Have
You're doing a
wonderful
great job.
day.
God bless.
Thank you. You're listening to Divine Mercy Radio's Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry.